And today we are diving deep into the magical weeds. We're going to be getting into a deconstruction of the wizard archetype, looking into the concepts and theories of magic, as well as Merlin, the tarot cards, looking at symbolism, mythology. It's going to be a whole bunch of stuff. So before we get going too far, can you guys please throw a thumbs up in the chat? Let me know that the sound is going well. It looks like everything is good on my end. So if you guys can just throw a thumbs up, I will know that we are good to go. So again, today we're going to be hitting on what is magic. We're going to be talking about the etymological roots and some of the main tenets and practices of magic itself, so we can better understand and deconstruct the wizard archetype. Sound is good. Excellent. Heck yeah. All right. And then I wanted to talk about also the tarot cards, the number one card. After technically it's number one. It's really the second card after the Fool, but it is the Magician card. And so we're going to get into the symbolism of that and looking into that further. And so I initially thought, you know what? I'll talk about wizards, magicians, witches, and shamans. And then in preparation for this video, it became quite clear that witches and shamans need to be their own videos and their own streams in and of themselves. That there's so much to talk about, so much to get into, that I have basically just kept it as a sort of surface level conversation on wizards and magic and magicians. And so I imagine this will take us well into over an hour in regards to streaming and lecturing. So should be a good one. First thing I want to do is mention that thank you. What about warlocks? Yeah, I mean, same thing. It's just different terminologies, I guess. Semantics. We're looking at more concepts. But first thing I want to do is thank everyone who has gone to davidpatrickharry.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com, it don't matter, and signed up for a membership for exclusive content. And so right now, yesterday I put up a new video, and then today, before doing work in preparation for this stream, I filmed another video. And so that video was actually on a really beautiful set of prayers from Saint Basil the Great that I read and discussed in a video. And so if you're interested in some exclusive content, again, I'm posting new videos every single week to the website. Right now, we got a really insightful conversation with Existential Delight that is up, a continued conversation on useful social theories, of course, a welcome video, and then the video that I filmed today, which will be up tonight. I didn't have enough time, I ran out of time in preparation for today's stream, that we will be getting into, or I'll be posting the one where I get into St. Basil the Great and these really beautiful prayers that I found in my Orthodox prayer book. If you, again, all you ortho bros out there, if you don't have your prayer book, what are you doing? You got to have your study Bible, got to have your prayer book. So that is going to be up. And then I'm also tomorrow going to film another exclusive video in continuation with today's topic in regards to the archetype of the wizard, talking about magic. And so I haven't decided what I want to, because in preparation for today's video, there's so much to cover that I've still, I want to do a video on a sort of understanding of Halloween, a Christian approach to Halloween, and the historicity of Halloween and all this stuff, get into that. And then I also want to make a video on witches, talking about witchcraft, looking into Wicca, looking at New Age paganism, and tying all these concepts together. So that's something that you can expect in the next week or so. And I really would like to do one on shamanism, because it's so central and related to the wizards and the magicians and, you know, the warlocks, if you prefer that term, and then witchcraft. But it really is its sort of own thing, you know, especially in the way that shamans are healers, tribal settings, all that different stuff. So I think those are going to be the 3 videos that you can expect in the near future. One on shamanism, one on witchcraft and witches, and the next one on Halloween. And I hope to do, yes, All Saints Eve and All Souls Eve. I hope to do that one probably the day before Halloween. So I'll expect that one the 29th or the 30th. I want to save that right before the holiday. So just wanted to throw that up there and let you guys know that, again, I'm posting exclusive content. So if you like what we're doing and you have a $5 to spare, again, a cup of coffee, I'm sure you guys spend that more than that a month in coffee. But if you have $5 to spare and you like what I'm doing, go to the website, davidpatrickcarey.com, churchoftheeternallogos.com. And vampires. Narrow Path Trading said, what about vampires? That is another great topic. My gosh, I may have to do shamans after Halloween. I think you just convinced me. We're gonna bring in vampires, do witchcraft, vampires, and Halloween instead of shamans. We can do shamans anytime. So great point. I'm gonna write that down. Actually, we're doing vampires. That is excellent. Vlad the Impaler is a saint in the Orthodox Church, mind you. That is great. Let me write that down. Okay. Definitely doing vampires. So, where do we begin? I think the first thing to do is get into what is magic. What is the concept of magic? Somebody saying werewolves. That's more mythological. Of course, vampires are too, but I think vampires are a little bit more interesting, if you will. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. And if you guys can, please smash that like button. You know, it helps with the YouTube algorithms. So always appreciate that. And if you can, share the link to the stream. Always wanting to get more people involved. So let's start by getting into what is magic, right? You say magic to somebody, and usually they're thinking David Blaine, David Copperfield, Chris Angel, stage magic, card magic, the manipulation of perception, which the manipulation of perception isn't entirely wrong, but that's why we call those more artistic expressions, right? The stage magic. We call it magic because of its ability to manipulate perception. Because as we will get into in regards to incantations and divinization and necromancy or astrology, what exactly is an incantation? And so the manipulation of somebody's perception of reality, we're going to see that tied with language. So very interesting stuff. But what is magic? And magic really is a set of practices and beliefs and rituals which are said to control and manipulate natural and supernatural beings and forces. And so when we look then, because we're going to be referencing Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter quite a bit, because I assume that would be a very good reference point for most of you who have already seen those movies. But the manipulation of nature itself is often associated with magic and ritual magic and all types of magic. And, you know, I did a recent stream over with St. Edward's Media, that is Michael Sisko, and we talked about sigil magic and how I at one point, before rediscovering Christ, coming back to the one true church, the one true faith, the Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Eastern Orthodox Church, that I actually engage in what's called sigil magic. And so sigil magic, again, is going to, I'll explain it here in a second, that it will embody and represent so much of what magic is doing, which is the sort of manifestation of one's own will. And so sigil magic, for example, some of you guys may have already be aware, but you can, and in this, so I'm not advocating anybody to do this. Actually, do not do it. I'm telling you not to do it, but I'm telling you what it is and how it works and how I did it. Previously is where you would take a desire, right? Because as we will see, the desire and the manifestation of desires or aspirations is going to be central to what the magician, the wizard, does. And so say, for example, you want an extra $1,000 at the end of the month. It has to be something that's somewhat attainable, not too far out of one's reach. And so you can write that sentence down on a piece of paper. My highest desire, my highest intention is to receive an extra $1,000 at the end of the month. You write that down, and then you go through and you mark out all the vowels. Why? Because vowels are phonetic. They contain no meaning within letters, within words. This is why if you actually look at words and they take out all the vowels and it's only consonants, you can still read the words because meaning is held within consonants. And so you do that if your sentence with your highest desire. Now you have a whole string of consonants, and then you go through and you mark out all the ones that repeat. By doing that, now you probably have somewhere between 12 and 20 consonants, and then you manipulate those into a pattern, into a symbol, something that looks nothing like the letters in which you're using to create it, but that every letter is embedded within that symbol in one way or another. That is related to this concept of you actually taking a desire and making it physical. You've taken something that's non-physical, your desire for an extra $1,000, and now you've made it physical into a two-dimensional symbol, an object, something that can be looked at. Then you want to charge that symbol, and there's multiple different ways you can do that. Again, I am telling nobody to engage in this activity. In fact, if you are, you should repent immediately, and we will. That will be clear throughout this video in regards to the sort of theological preconditions of why your will should not be, the intention should not be to always manifest what you want, but what God wants. And so now you've created this symbol and you can charge it. You can charge it in a few different ways. One, you can get a bunch of different people to look at it. And this is really, when you get into deeper theories of magic, what corporate symbols are doing. And so if you look at the siren of Greek mythology, and then you look at the logo for the Starbucks, and why is it that they chose a symbol that mythologically represents this beautiful woman who sort of enamors and captivates the sailors that sail by. And so at night, being captivated, sail towards her to only be lured into a trap, to have their possessions stolen, their money taken, and potentially even killed. And so interesting that that would be a corporate symbol of Starbucks. But this concept of symbols and embedding intentions within two-dimensional objects, this is sigil magic, and this is real. It absolutely is real, and anybody who's got deep into magic knows that sigil magic is real. And it lets you know that there's sort of mystical quality of language, which again is going to be tied to our theology as Christians in regards to God speaking the world into existence and our necessity to speak truth, to be honest. And how we're going to see then, as what we'll get into in sort of incantations and more sinister forms of magic, the manipulation of words, the manipulation of language in order to alter people's perceptions, get them to fall victim to different things, different plans, different agendas, right? So that whole process, right? So that somehow that I can write something down, turn it into a symbol, and then put it out there, and then it can get in people's minds and be charged. That is based on this concept of sympathetic magic. You've heard me talk about this before, or the law of correspondences, like affects like. This is a sort of hermetic adage, right? As above, so below, as within, so without. But there's embedded within this worldview, this paradigm, these presuppositions, is that things affect what they are like. And so if you're going to do, as we talked about in regards to Renaissance magic and Marsilio Ficino and his translation project of the Hermetic Corpus, and how he was very much interested in ritual magic. So when he wanted to do a hymn to Venus or something, he would, everything would be sympathetic, meaning it would match up. There was a correspondence that the color of the drapes, the color of the candles, the time of the day, the words that are spoken, the clothes that he's wearing, all this stuff has to match up. And by doing so, it creates a stronger efficacy of these sort of ritual aspects, these what we would call ritual magic. And ritual magic then comes into a variety of different forms and what you can do in regards to conjuration, divinization, incantations, astrological understandings. This can all be related to ritual magic, but that is a whole nother video in itself in regards to the variety and types of magic. And that's not what we're getting into today. We're going to be getting into the deconstruction of the wizard or the magician archetype. So as we see with like the Lord of the Rings, as we see with many many of these movies, Harry Potter, somehow the magic is intrinsically tied to sort of the natural world, nature, animals, spirits, and stuff of this sort. So, um, um, yeah, that's a good one. Hey, thanks, Pano. Thrown into $2. He says, "Yep, Starbucks attracts young, enchanting females." Absolutely. And in fact, we're going to see somebody of the wizard archetype, like a Merlin, having much trouble with the young females. That's certainly one of his weaknesses. So we'll come to that here in a few. But this concept of sympathetic magic has to be understood for any of this stuff to make any sense whatsoever. Okay, for the law of correspondences, sympathetic magic. And so I really want to highlight what sympathetic magic is. I've tried to already articulate how that works in regards to sigil magic, but this is replete within tribal traditions, right? And this is where this idea actually comes from, a very famous scholar named James George Frazer. And it's not that he came up with the concept of sympathetic magic, it's that he popularized it in regards to using those words to describe it. If you go to a tribal society and they want to do a ritual to the sun, and then the symbols that they draw, the time of the day, all this different stuff is going to be coordinated and connected in regards to this presupposition of correspondences, of sympathetic magic. And so James George Frazer popularized this term in his famous work called The Golden Bough. The Golden Bough. I'm sure some of you who are a little bit more scholastically inclined are well aware of this book. It's very important in regards to the study of religion, but certainly the theories of magic. And this is one of the things that I got into in regards to my undergraduate studies at IUPUI. Was I was very much interested in magic, theories of magic, and really the main conversation academically that had been held from 19th to the 20th century was that magic was the precursor to religion. Now, I don't subscribe to this framework whatsoever, but this was basically the scholastic framework that magic is more of a primitive understanding and a failure to recognize the law of causation. And therefore, magic then leads to religion, which is going to be a more systematized, a more formal form of these same yearnings. And then that's going to eventually be tied to science. And that somehow we get science out of religion, and then we get religion from magic. And it's this evolutionary framework, which obviously if you're working in the 19th century, the 20th century, most of these people were totally embedded within that Darwinian Wallace framework of evolutionary theory. And therefore everything, we talked about Emil Durkheim in the last stream, and useful social theories to look at, sociological theories to look at society in 2020. He also was working off that framework. So much of the academic discussion, and that includes E.B. Tylor, for those of you who are aware of Edward Burnett Tylor, Emil Durkheim, as we talked in the last stream, James George Frazer, or also Bronislaw Malinowski did a lot of work. He was an ethnographer, he was an anthropologist, and these people would go and live with tribal people, and then they would write about it, and they had a very pejorative understanding of magic as just a failure to really develop one's cognitive apparatus to perceive scientific understanding, laws of causation, really to root one's epistemology in induction, right? And so we've talked about this before, and how that's going to move all the way back to Aristotle. That's really, in this whole framework, it is possible because of scholasticism. And if you want to know more about that, go over to Jay Dyer's channel. He talks a lot about that. So again, if you guys can, please smash that like for everybody who just joined. Always appreciate that. So what I want to do is also read quickly Frazer and his... There we go. He is famous for really articulating this concept of correspondences as sympathetic magic, which is a big deal within talking about how ritual or magic rituals work. And he says this is in, again, his famous book, The Golden Bough, which I really don't I don't think anybody needs to purchase unless, again, you're much more of the scholastic mindset and you want to know, well, what was a sort of the leading edge of academic thought in the early 20th century regarding religion and magic and science? Well, then, okay, go ahead and get the Golden Bough. It may be a little bit expensive, but for those of you that are just more casual observers or inquirers, the Golden Bough is not something you need to purchase. Anyways, what he says is, if we analyze the principles of thought on which magic is based, they will probably be found to resolve themselves in two. First, that like produces like, and that in effect resembles its cause. And second, that things which have once been in contact with each other continue to act on each other at a distance after the physical contact has been severed. The former principle may be called the law of similarity, the latter the law of contact or contagion. From the first of these principles, namely the law of similarity, the magician infers that he can produce any effect he desires merely by imitating it. From the second, he infers that whatever he does to a material object will affect equally the person with whom the object was once in contact, whether it formed part of his body or not. And so, in regards to the law of contact, the law of contagion, I think a perfect example of this and how it plays itself out would be voodoo dolls, right? So how does a voodoo doll work? Well, you have to create this doll, this humanoid-like figure, right? And then you have to get a little piece of that person's hair. You have to get a little piece of that person's shirt, a little piece of that person's pants, and now you've created something that is in contact. It is sympathetically connected with that person themselves, and then what you do to that doll will affect them. This is what the thought is. I'm not saying that voodoo is real. It seems to be real if you believe it to be real, and so we can get into all these different concepts in regards to the placebo effect and mind over matter, but that is another subject. So I thought it'd be interesting to then look at the term magic, etymologically speaking. Where do we get this term? Where does it come from? And that really helps us really understand the history of this thought. And so magic or magi or magician actually comes to us in English from the Latin, which is just magus. So we understand Simon Magus from the Bible, right? From Acts. That's where we get the whole concept of simony, unfortunately, which seems to be appearing in the Greek Orthodox Church in America in Goarch, so simony, for those of you who aren't aware, simony is a heresy, a very detrimental act within Christianity where one pays for the acquisition of the Holy Spirit. That is a big no-no, right? And so Simon Magus in Acts sees some of the miracles the apostles are displaying in public, and he wants to do that, and he wants to be able to command the Holy Spirit, and he tries to pay them for baptism, of which they reject, and that is called simony. Then the act of trying to pay to be baptized is called the act of simony, and it seems like a lot of Goarch is actually promoting simony in a way. So anyways, I digress. The magus in the Latin comes from the Greek magos, and that actually comes from the Persian magus. And then that is believed to come from the Proto-Indo-European maga, which is to be able. And I couldn't help but think of the relationship, the phonetic, because one of the things we're going to be talking about is the importance of the way words sound as opposed to the way they're spelt, because spelling is much, well, we'll get into spells and different little theories in regards to that, but the way a word sounds is very, very important in regards to its sort of efficacy in magical ritual and magical thought. So I couldn't help but think that the root word comes from Proto-Indo-European, and it sounds like MAGA. And then we have Donald Trump and MAGA and all this stuff. I don't know. Just thought it was evil. And so it means to be able, because as we will see, the magician is able to do all these things in the world. Incantations, divinization, necromancy, astrology. And so that is believed to potentially be rooted to the old Semitic or the Chinese root language of Mayag, meaning mage or shaman. So I think all this is really interesting, and this is kind of where we get our words from. Now, I wanted to connect because Persia is noted for their astrological magic. There is a book that I read during my master's degree, which, again, unless you're interested in this stuff, I think it's worthwhile, but it's a big, it's not good scholarship, but there's a book by, what is his name? I think it's Morton Smith, and it's called Jesus the Magician. And so he was a homosexual American religious scholar, and he tried to make the argument that Jesus was really just a Mediterranean Jewish magician that was sort of wrapped up in the goings-on of the cultures in which he existed in. Now, you can read his book. He doesn't really make the strongest case, but one of the things that he talks about, and really is just known generally speaking in regards to ancient understandings of magic, is how the Persians were exceptional with astrology and astrological magic. And so when we look then at Matthew's chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, who is it that the Orthodox Church teaches came to give frankincense to Christ, who recognized the incarnation of God, that all of creation was participating in? None other than 3 Persians. And so I wanted to read Matthew chapter 2, verse 1 through 11 real quick, and then hit some of the footnotes here that I think are really interesting and connect with Persian understandings of magic. And so these ideas are even biblically, not that we would promote magic whatsoever, but the idea that the Persians were had an affinity towards astrological understandings. Well, it's right here. So Chapter 2, Gentiles worship the Christ child. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, quote, But you, Bethlehem in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. Unquote. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced in exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. And so the footnote, as we read in the Orthodox Study Bible, says Herod, regarding these wise men, the wise men, or Magi, who come from the east, most likely Persia, were the scholars of their time. In the Old Testament, Balaam was one of their predecessors, a Gentile who anticipated the Messiah. These foreigners prefigure the church in which membership is determined by faith and not by ethnic lineage. A star proclaims the extraordinary birth of Christ. To ancient pagans, a star signified a god, a deified king, reference to Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. Christ being born under this star fulfills the prophecy in Psalms chapter 109, verse 3, and shows all of creation participating in the incarnation. And so then, fast forward, we're going to skip a footnote into where it's talking about the Magi entering the house. Into the house. Whereas the Jewish shepherds worshiped the Savior in the cave on the day he was born, Luke chapter 2, verses 8 through 20, the Gentile Magi came to worship him sometime later. By then, Joseph and Mary had found a house in which to dwell. This indicates that Christ first came to the Jews and then afterward was worshipped by the Gentiles. The significance of the Magi's gifts is revealed in a hymn sung at Compline of the Nativity. Gold is for the King of Ages, frankincense is for the God of all, and myrrh is offered to the Immortal One, who shall be 3 days dead. Okay, so I just thought that was worth highlighting. And moving back to our topic, early Christians used the term magic to describe a whole host of different activities. And so this is going to get down to, again, as you guys are going to be well aware of already, this fundamental distinction between implementing one's will into the world, the manifestation of one's desire through ritualistic means, and the submission of one's will to God's will. This is the whole life of the Christian, is to try to submit one's will in real total humility to God's will. So Christians, understanding this to be a fundamental demarcation between them and the pagan world, then described all their activities as magic. And that term magic, again, magos was already, the Greek word, was being used in a very pejorative way already in Greek society. So even within Greek society, they were using magos to talk about really sort of fallacious activities, things that weren't really true. And so they would call those things sort of magic. Now, I know magic means a lot of different things to different people, but I'm just trying to highlight that the connotation of that word already was taking a sort of pejorative and negative tone before the Christians adopted it to then describe as all really non-Christian activity as magical or fanciful in one way or another, or demonic or sinister or whatever, however you want to frame that. So some of the things that they were looking at were like enchantments, divinization, conjuration, incantations, necromancy, and astrology, to name a few. And so enchantment, as one of the people in the chat, LeeBoy2K1 says, Michael Witkoff was telling Jay yesterday that a lot of postmodern artists curse their paintings. And that would be a form of incantation, right? You're putting a sort of spell on an object. And this is going to be a little bit different than incantation. And so I want to talk about the differences, but conjuration, you guys are already going to be familiar with. Conjuration is the conjuring of spirits themselves. This is another ritualistic practice of magic. So incantation is a spell or charm intended to trigger a magical effect on a person or object, spoken, sung, or chanted. And so the incantations, I think it's really interesting. So some of you guys are going to be familiar with, oh my gosh, what's his name? I'm having a brain fart. The comic book writer, last name Moore. He's very much into magic. If you guys remember who I'm talking about, please say it. Let me pull it up. It's going to bother me, and I'm not going to be able to think. I forget. Anyways, Alan Moore. Thank you, Ray the Musician. It's Alan Moore. Thank you. I could not remember his first name. Alan Moore talks about how magic is words, mostly words. And so again, this form of incantational is a spell or a charm. And again, it's usually spoken, sung, or chanted is the performative ritual in which it's enacted. And so he talks about how spelling itself. So what is a spell? According to Alan Moore, who claims to be a practicing magician, is to spell words. And so the manipulation of words, again, and sounds is the manipulation of meaning, is going to be then the manipulation of people's perceptions and the images within their own minds. And when he talks about grimoires are these books that contain all these magical spells. He said, well, it's funny that this is the root word for grammar. And so our grammar books are really, in his understanding, or at least his framework, are sort of works of magic Doorman 360 said he's a follower of Aleister Crowley. What a weird. Yes, and Thelema again. What is Thelema? Do what thou wills is the highest of the law. And so, very, very, very interesting stuff there. So, incantation, that's a form of incantation magic. Divinization magic. This is really popular in ancient societies. So I took a class on like folk Chinese religion in college, and our professor was a younger guy, but he was an expert on divinization practices in ancient China, and how they would use like turtle shells. They would kill turtles and then flip them over, and the inside of the turtle shell they would read, and somehow this would give them insights into the future, insights into questions and the problems that they're experiencing. And so divinization magic is about an attempt to gain insight into a question or problem by way of an occultic ritual, often by reading signs or omens or supernatural contact. And so we could also see the sort of oracles at Delphi, again, being a form of divinization in which a society based itself around a sort of divinization ritual. Really interesting stuff there. But there's so many forms of divinization. I know in like Islamic culture, I believe one of them that is very popular just amongst people, which they may not consider magic, is like something to do with espresso shots and like looking at the bottom of the espresso residue after you've drank it, or like turning it over. And there's all these different ways in which you can like read your espresso shot, and it may be indicating something about the future. So divinization is replete, and a lot of people, and even people look at numbers in our society. The whole concept of Jungian synchronicity, the 1111, 444, 333, this type of stuff. Is God speaking to you through these numbers? I don't know. I'll leave that to you. Are they telling you insights in regards to the future? Probably not. Another one that I wanted to discuss, again, a different form of magic that Christians were talking about, was necromancy. Magical practice of communicating with the dead by summoning spirits are done to extract hidden knowledge from the dead. And so what is interesting, and one of the things that I wanted to point out in today's video, is that when we look at the archetype of the wizard, which we're going to get into next, now that we have a better understanding of what magic is, it looks like a sort of bastardization, a sort of manipulation, almost a precursor of Christ himself. Because does Christ use a sort of, can he speak things into existence? Absolutely. Can he divinize and see into the future? Absolutely. Can he commune and raise the dead? Absolutely. In regards to astrology, I don't see Christ ever really talking about where Venus is and if Mercury's retrograde or not. But certainly he wouldn't need to do that. But it's very interesting that the root word of the magus, right, is to be able, and really it's about being able to do so many things that we would say are fully embodied within the incarnation of the Logos. Last one being astrology. You guys all know what astrology is. Claims divine information about human events by studying the movements of stars and other celestial objects. So those are some of the things that I wanted to highlight. And before we get into the wizard archetype, I did want to say that, because I could imagine somebody saying, "Oh, bro, don't you know that there's white magic, gray magic, and black magic?" And my response is, yes, I read Manly P. Hall as well. And yes, I listened to Manly P. Hall's lectures on magic. But that whole framework of white, gray, and black magic, which is, we see that present within Lord of the Rings, right? When we see Gandalf the Gray transfigure into Gandalf the White, this is built upon, again, this premise of black, gray, white magic, because Saruman, right, turns from white to black in regards to his relationship to, evil. And so we see then Gandalf move from gray to white. And so this whole trichotomy, if you will, is that somehow white magic is like this selfless form of magic, and that gray magic is not selfless, but it's not malicious, and then that black magic can be malicious, and it's all about one really attaining power in the world one way or another at all expense, usually to the detriment of many other people. But how does one go about defining these things? Because what one person may deem malicious or black magic may be considered white magic to somebody else. And so one of the problems, again, if you're going to get more sophisticated about these worldviews, I think right there, what we see again is the immersion of relativism. Who's making these demarcations? And so when you say, oh yeah, there's white, gray, and black, you're failing to understand how these are ultimately being demarcated and finding their outlines, right? Who is defining them? So again, the big one is man's will versus God's will. It doesn't matter if you're doing white, gray, or black. You're performing magic, and ultimately you're worshiping your own will. So now we can either get into the wizard archetype or the tarot. I have a whole thing on the magician #1 card and the tarot on its symbolism. Maybe we should just get into the wizard archetype. So the wizard archetype, what we think about with that bearded old white man with the long white hair and the pointy wizard hat and the long robes, this actually comes to us. It's an amalgamized archetype that has come to us really from Merlin. So we get Merlin in the 12th century, the 1100s, and this is obviously in Britain. So believe near Wales, I believe, is where it was written. And it itself was an amalgamation of all these different legends of potentially people that lived or didn't live. And so Merlin is the sort of source of our current concept of a wizard. It was developed in the Middle Ages, so before we get the Renaissance magic. So much of what we think about magic really is influenced by the Renaissance, but Merlin was pre-Renaissance. And so post-Renaissance, I would say the most influential person in regards to the archetype of the magician is John Dee. John Dee. And again, he is the source of the 007, right? James Bond, the undercover agent. And so I did a whole stream, for those of you who aren't aware or are aware, on Hermeticism and the Hermetic tradition, and John Dee and his magical enterprises in Europe. And so some of you, just to highlight in case you guys aren't aware, so John Dee is a very, very interesting figure, one that if you don't know, you should know. And he was arguably the most learned man in all of England. He was a prominent figure in the court of Queen Elizabeth. He had arguably the largest library in all of England. And he developed for example, he was also a scientifically minded individual. He invented the navigational devices that Sir Francis Scott used to go around the coast of California and the Horn of Africa. I believe that was his name. I may be having a brain fart there. And he was known as a great mathematician as well, John Dee. But what he was most interested in all his life was magic. And so he and this gentleman named Edward Kelly actually developed what we would call Enochian language, the Enochian language. And they believe that to be the language of the angels. And magic was... Doorman360 says, Orthodox monks have long gray wizard beards. Yeah, I would say... that's because orthodoxy contains the real mystery. And so, yeah, I'll say a little bit about that later. Narrow Path Trading threw in $20. And he says, thanks for the great videos and information. All glory to Jesus Christ, our King of Kings. Absolutely. All glory to Jesus Christ. But thank you very much, Narrow Path Trading. I really, really appreciate that. And I'm glad that you find these videos insightful and informative and interesting enough to continue watching and even participating and donating. So thank you very much, brother. I really appreciate that. And Doorman360, great ortho bro, says Orthodox monks have long gray wizard beards. I would say wizards have long gray Orthodox beards, but no, I get your point. I'm just teasing. So anyways, so John Dee, really interestingly, him and this guy named Edward Kelly, and Edward Kelly didn't even have ears. This is what's so interesting, and something I highlighted in the video on Hermeticism, is that this guy named Edward Kelly had his ears cut off because this was actually a common practice to indicate somebody was a conman. And so then to indicate all the people he would come in contact with, to say, hey, when he's got a fancy idea, keep your wallet in your pocket, he didn't have ears. And so this guy, a known con man, comes to arguably the most learned man in all of England, spoke multiple languages, was really right at the time before the Enlightenment where you could be a sort of, have a grasp on all of the total knowledge, what we would call a real Renaissance man, right? And according to legend, according to John Dee, this stone fell from the sky in his backyard, this black obsidian stone that was really reflective. You could actually, it was almost like a mirror. It was so black that he claimed this was the shoe stone, S-H-E-W, not S-H-O-E like a shoe on your foot, but S-H-E-W, the shoe stone. And he basically believed this to be almost like the philosopher's stone. And this shoe stone, this black obsidian stone that John Dee, the most learned man in all of England, this undercover agent within the court of Queen Elizabeth, claims fell from the sky, and this guy named Edward Kelly could look into it and communicate with spiritual entities. So they went on a wild expedition across Europe, going to different kingdoms, visiting different kings, eventually landing in the court of Rudolph II. And this was a very wild court. So if you guys are familiar with the sort of Bohemian enterprise right before the 30 Years' War, where there almost was a sort of hermetic, of course it ended up getting squashed in the 30 Years' War, but there's almost like a hermetic empire right there in Eastern Europe out of Prague, what we would call the Bohemian Empire. And Rudolph II, I mean, he had like midgets. I mean, it was crazy. It was like you go to his court and it was like you're in a circus, man. I mean, the joke, like our mental image of like the jokers and like midgets everywhere, like the strangest stuff he wanted to acquire and collect. And so all that stuff would have been present at Rudolph II's court. And so he was very much interested in these magical practices between John Dee and Edward Kelly, and really gave them a place in his palace to convert lead into gold. Anyways, throughout this whole journey, Edward Kelly and John Dee, Edward Kelly would look into the shoe stone on hours at end. John Dee would write down all the stuff. They would then translate it and figure out what was being said. And it turned into, according to John Dee, these long, coherent ramblings that he believed to be coming from angels, Christian angels. And that's why he termed this language the Enochian language. And it's still practiced. And there's even what's called Enochian magic still practiced today, which is a continuation of this sort of John Dee magical strain. So eventually, long story short, Edward Kelly dies by trying to escape the palace, because John Dee, being part of the court of Queen Elizabeth, is summoned back to England. And of course, he's able to go, given the immense prestige who's calling for his return. He goes back to England. Edward Kelly stuck there at the in Prague at the castle, having to convert lead into gold. He can't do it. He knows he can't do it. He tries to escape one night, and the palace having Spanish tiles, he slips off, falls off the roof, and kills himself. Now, one of the interesting things, and this is a side note, really unrelated to our video, but at one point, showing how I think Edward Kelly is such a con man, he actually convinced John Dee. So they got all this stuff. I mean, we're talking about months and months and months of work with this shoe stone, and like going into altered states, using the Enochian language, trying to attain esoteric, hidden, occultic information. And then the well starts drying up, and Edward Kelly convinces John Dee that he has to sleep with his wife, and that they should basically be swingers, and that they should swap partners. And John Dee was married, given his high status with English society, to a very beautiful young woman, and Edward Kelly not so much. And so John Dee does that, and that really basically destroyed it. From my understanding, it really left John Dee a bit sour and angry. But that's what happens when you get embedded within the webs of magic. So John Dee, along with Merlin, are really their source for the wizard archetype. And Merlin himself was a combination of sort of a prophet, a madman, and a seer. And his weakness, as I mentioned previously, was, of course, young, beautiful women. And aren't we all a little weak when it comes to that? But when we look at the wizard archetype, they're always portrayed as the wise old man, very learned, usually, often surrounded by books, usually have a sort of philosophical disposition. This is what I wrote down. And they tend to be the guider of the less mature or inexperienced people. So if you look at a sort of Albus Dumbledore of the Harry Potter series, or Gandalf within the Lord of the Rings, I think these are two figures for many of us, are easier for us to look at the sort of wizard archetype and how it plays itself out within our pop culture. And so what do we see? An older man, again, exuding these same things, very learned, surrounded by books, often act as the sort of moral compass for those around them. And this is going to be very different because within this wizard archetype, there's a flip side. There's a immense dialectic, and we see also an immense evil. So if we look again at Lord of the Rings, we see Sauron, we see Lord Voldemort and Harry Potter. And what have they done? They are persons who have really surrendered their moral integrity in order to achieve power and success. And so we see Sauron betray Gandalf in the first Lord of the Rings, where they sends him up to, the ceiling of his tower. We see Lord Voldemort, have all his, want to take over Hogwarts, all this stuff in the Harry Potter series. But what I thought was interesting is when we look at the sort of evil side of the wizard archetype, I would say that we find the origins of the evil genius archetype. And this is something that I talked about. I did a whole stream on the evil genius archetype and talked about how technology works. And when we look at movies, or Dr. Evil example from Austin Powers, but really that is a comical exaggeration of these archetypes. But that the evil genius archetype, Pinky in the Brain, how that plays itself out, that cartoon, is somebody who's so overly rationalistic, somebody who worships their own intelligence, somebody who's so enamored with the world that they also want to dominate, they want to control, they want to manipulate. And that idea, I think, is really rooted in the flip side of the wizard archetype. And so we can see this in Faust, right? So those of you who have read Faust, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Goethe wrote this very famous book called Faust, right? And so we talk about Faustian things, right? If you ever heard anybody say something was Faustian, they're talking about this famous book called Faust. And Faust makes a pact with the devil to attain what he wants in the world. This is where we get really, although, the notion of selling your soul to the devil is obviously existed before Faust, but this is obviously is a high cultural symbolism of this thing, right? That has been replete within Western civilization. Sure. And Doorman360 says, in Lord of the Rings, the wizards aren't humans; they're akin to angels. Sure. If you want to get into specifics regarding Tolkien and how he uses paganism to articulate Christian truths, that is a whole nother thing. But we're talking about the archetype, and obviously they are hominids. Obviously, Gandalf is human form. You can say he's an angel or something like that, but that really isn't going to get at what I'm trying to talk about in regards to these deeper rooted patterns within their presentations in like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. But I see your point. So the evil side of the wizard archetype makes that Faustian deal, basically, that Faust makes with the devil, to reject, moral integrity for a power and success in this world. In fact, there's a line that I wanted to grab out of Faust for this. That he says, he laid, this is out of Faust, by the way, and I think this really highlights, again, just a pattern here that I think is interesting. So this is a quote from Faust. He laid the holy scripture behind the door and under the bench, and refused to be called a doctor of theology, but preferred to be styled a doctor of medicine. And this is highlighting how Faust was giving up transcendent things, giving up divine knowledge for worldly knowledge. Now, what does Paul say about worldly knowledge, right? And so in Faust, we see somebody giving up, who is a doctor in theology, giving up divine knowledge of a world that has been fallen, knowledge from below. And no wonder then he sells his soul to the devil. And again, this is mythological. These are stories. These are archetypes. But I think this is very interesting. And I think this highlights that difference that is being symbolized in the dialectic between the wizard archetype, between a Sauron and a Gandalf, right? Between these two things. We got another super chat. Want to learn truth, threw in $10. Thank you very much, brother. I appreciate that. And he says, the Logos is mysterious in that it enables holy wonder workers who are in communion with it to perform great works with it to bring glory to God. And I would agree with that, absolutely. And that's why I think the whole thing that I'm talking about in regards to these wizard archetypes, these magical magician archetypes, is that they're almost, if we want to use, Justin Martyr's concept of logos spermaticos, they're almost sperm seeds, seeds of logos, seeds of who Christ is in regards to what they can do, their abilities, their relationship to wisdom, their relationship to knowledge, their relation. And then another thing that I was thinking about in regards to the way that they're physically portrayed. Again, we get a lot of this stuff from Merlin, that old man with the long beard, with the long hair, with the pointy hat, but also how it seems to be, there seems to be a sort of relationship with the heretical, especially within our Orthodox faith, depictions of God the Father, right? We're not supposed to be ever depicting God the Father, but when they do, say Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, he's this huge, he looks like he's a wrestler, and he's this old bearded man with long white hair. It seems like, again, the wizard archetype is an amalgamation of sort of Christ and the heretical forms of the Father presented in Renaissance art and stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe that's something you guys disagree with. I just thought it was interesting and worth noting. And another thing related to the wizard archetype is they often carry a staff. Now, what does the staff represent? Now, clearly, this is going to be representing the sort of masculine principle, the phallus, if you will. And so what does the phallus mean? Well, it means being able to erect things in the world, right? Because the whole archetype behind the wizard, the whole archetype behind the magician is that they can manifest their will in reality. And that is a sort of masculine project, that they are sort of penetrating reality, right? And so if you want to get vulgar, if you will, in regards to symbolism, that the wizard typically, always displayed as a man holding his long staff, his will is able to penetrate the world and then manifest what he wants, what he desires. That is a little bit different than being a receiver. And so the long staff also is typically symbolic of stability, right? Walking sticks help people become stable and walk long distances. Obviously, that has a dimension within its symbolic meaning. But also another one, for those of you who are a little bit more interested or have read like Mircea Eliade, Base Philosophy Mom says, this is getting dirty. That it also represents the world tree, right? The axis mundi, if we want to use sort of Rudolf Otto language. Rudolf Otto was a very famous scholar who studied religion, and he came up with the holy other and also the axis mundi, the numinous, these types of ideas. But the axis mundi is sort of the central axis between heaven and earth. And so this is also symbolized like with Yggdrasil, the world tree within Norse mythology. We see this sort of axis between heaven and earth in the wizard's staff. This is one of the reasons why he holds it, because what is, as we will get into with the Magician Tarot, the magician stands as a mediator between the non-physical and the physical, a mediator between heaven and earth. This is why they're so focused on the Hermetic adage, as above, so below. So again, who in our worldview is the mediator between heaven and earth? Who in our worldview is the ultimate reconciler of the non-physical and the physical? Of course, that is Christ. And that's why it's so interesting how so much of these archetypes, I think, or patterns tend to lay over on who we understand Christ is, but they don't go the full way. And so maybe these all are, because some of this stuff does pre-exist of the incarnation, that these are spermaticos. These are seeds of logos present beforehand. I don't know, something to think about. Mr. Mega Dipper, Mr. Mega Dipper says, great channel, man. Thank you very much, brother. I appreciate that. Hans Gruber says, the wizard is connected to the hermit. Yes. So the hermit, well, it depends on what you mean by hermit. So if you mean hermit as just an ascetic, it can be. Not all wizards were hermits. Often they are. But when you say hermit, that word itself is related to Hermes and then Hermeticism. And so Hermeticism, obviously being a magical worldview, is tied to the wizard and all this different stuff. So, yes, Thomas Henderson says the Magi are called to worship himself. That really is the case. That ultimately is the case. And that's what's so interesting, is that so much of these patterns, as we see, match on to Christ, match on to Christian understandings of God, yet in the end, the wizard is the end-all be-all. And so he's, for example, magic already assumes that man is at a unique ontological place in which he can command spirits to act. So we, existing in time, have a level of free will in which entities that are also created outside time, angels and demons, do not necessarily are able to exert the same free will. And so we exist at a unique status. And this is also tied to Christian theology, right? This is why, if you guys actually become members at my website, the prayer that I read from St. Basil the Great highlights this, about how Christ wants the sinner to repent. You can only repent if you're in time. You can only change your mind. You can only change directions if you're in space-time. If you're in eternity, you're kind of stuck. And so this brings up a whole nother theological discussion on can Satan repent, given him and his minions in regards to their status within eternity. Hey guys, if you can, smash that like button. Always appreciate, helps with the algorithm. Looks like some more people have joined. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw in a super chat. If you have if you like what's going on here and you'd like to see some exclusive content, check out davidpatrickcarey.com and sign up for an exclusive members-only website membership. New videos coming in every single week. So, the staff, the long wooden staff of the wizard represents stability. It represents the phallic principle. It represents his ability to penetrate reality with his own desires, to manifest his aspirations and his intentions. And it also indicates his ability to create, because what is the offshoot of the staff other than the magical wand? And what is the magical wand doing? The magical wand is creating, right? This is how you cast your spell. This is how the ritual, again, in more fanciful sort of artistic expressions of magic, this is how it's done with your magic wand. I mean, a lot of that comes from Druidry. That's a whole, that should be a video in itself. I should do one just on magic wands and the Druids, which is really interesting. And so some of you who got into these sort of conspiratorial and esoteric rabbit holes, maybe before you found Christ or came to Orthodoxy or Christianity, are familiar with Jordan Maxwell, and he talks about the next thing that I wanted to mention in regards to the wood of the magic wand and how the efficacy of the magic wand is tied to what it is made of, right? Which then that itself is tied to the concept of correspondence, is tied to the concept of sympathies and sympathetic magic. But some of you guys have probably already heard this before. If you watch Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is given a very special magic wand. It's made from a particular type of tree, the holly tree, Holly. And so this is why Jordan Maxwell, I'm sorry, not Peterson, talks about how holly tree, magic wands made of the holly tree were often deemed to be the most powerful of magic wands. And this is believed to be the origin of why Hollywood calls itself Hollywood. That it's named after the most efficacious wood to make a magic wand, because what Hollywood is doing is casting spells through their films in order to manipulate the perceptions of people and their perceived reality, therefore getting them to act in certain ways, affecting them. Again, incantations, as we talked about earlier, using words, using symbols, using sigils to manipulate reality, to manipulate other people. And so we see that with Hollywood, again, using the holly tree, Hollywood. If you want a very powerful magic wand, you get it from Hollywood. So very interesting stuff there. The next part of the wizard archetype that I wanted to go into is their sophistication of words and language. Words and language is a often important facet of what the wizard does, because as we've already talked about with Alan Moore, spelling words is a spell. That is to cast a spell. Now, obviously, it gets more complicated than that, but when we see language, so if we think of gods of magic, again, related to my video on Hermeticism, we see Hermes Trismegistus, we see Thoth of Egypt, we see Mercury of Roman mythology. What is some of the common features of them? Well, they're all gods of language, gods of writing, gods of words, gods of spelling, and also, coincidentally, related to magic. So there's something particular here about language. There's something special about language and meaning, the manipulation of these things, and this perceived understanding of magic that goes all the way back to ancient Egypt. And so that's why go look up magical deities. And it's remarkable across cultures how many of them are also gods of language. So why is it so common that gods of language and gods of magic are one and the same thing? Very, very interesting. Thomas Henderson just threw in 20 CA, and he says, keep doing the Lord's work. Well, thank you very, very much, brother. I really, really appreciate that contribution. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. So, so we see another archetype related to the wizard is their sophistication and facility over language, over words, over meaning. And so even within Lord of the Rings, we see Gandalf being able to speak all the different languages of all the different people. You know, even if I've recently watched The Hobbits, it was on TV, bored one evening. So I was like, okay, well, I haven't watched these. So I watched them, and I forget which, the dwarves are going to take back their castle or whatever, the dragons inside, and they're having a meeting with all the elves. And it's only Gandalf that's like the non-elf that can understand and participate. So we even see, again, the same archetype, that the wizards have a special facility over language, this ability to understand and communicate. And then the last thing that I wanted to say in regards to that facility over language is the importance of spoken words. So again, there is a primacy of the spoken word. Now, this is really interesting, and it can get a little bit more academic, but you've heard me talk about of grammatology, Jacques Derrida. I've talked about phallogocentrism, all this. We're not going to go into that, but there's a kernel that's very interesting that he's very critical of. And he claims that Western civilization, the logocentric Christian worldview, so that's both Eastern Europe and Western Europe, really just Christendom, privileges the spoken word over the written word. And now he is not a fan of that, but I think to most people that makes sense, because there's something powerful about the spoken word. And now he ties that back to our theology that God spoke the world into existence, and that somehow verbal language is itself a vibration. There's a and just think about language itself. Just think about how crazy this is right now, that I'm sitting somewhere. I'm in Indiana. Most of you guys are in different parts of the world. I'm saying sounds of different vibrations, and they're entering your ear, and they're all immediately being picked up as words full of meaning, and I can begin to color the inside of your head with thoughts. There's something very interesting about language itself. Even in the psychedelic community, I talked about ayahuasca ceremonies, and this I'll talk more about in my video on shamanism and shamans. But when they go into these altered states, these ayahuasca states where everybody's high on liquid forms of dimethyltryptamine, that the shaman starts to sing these icaros, these tribal ritualistic songs, and they become visible, that somehow language becomes visible. This was even theorized by Philo of Alexandria, right? Philo of Judea. He talked about the more perfect logos. Now, again, this is a non-Christian, right? This is a Jewish man wrapped up within Hellenistic civilization. He was a Middle Platonist. We're looking at contemporary with Christ, actually, right at the turn. And he was very much interested in trying to prove the concept of logos as present within the Old Testament. This is what Philo of Alexandria was so sort of enamored with. And he talked about logos as speech. Of course, that's one energy from our Orthodox theology. That's one energy of the logos. But he says the more perfect logos will eventually become visible, which is really interesting. And Terence McKenna used to pick up on this thing when he talked about the sort of visible language regarding ayahuasca, that if you really want to see what somebody means, right? That's what we use that phrase when you're communicating with somebody and they say something, you go, oh, I see what you mean. That we use visual metaphors to talk about the auditory experience of speech. And that if speech moves into its more sophisticated forms, eventually we will literally see what people mean. And that when you speak, it creates an image. This is a theory, but it's interesting that Philo of Judea thought something along Philo of Judea, Philo of Alexandria thought something along those lines. But the importance of vibrations, the importance of spoken word, if you guys are familiar with cymatics is a whole science in regards to the patterns within sound. So you can go on YouTube right now, type in cymatics, 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 and you'll see people putting sand onto sort of cymatic speakers, cymatic platforms, and then turning up notches within tone. So it just does a tone, and they can ratchet it up slowly, and they begin to form sacred geometric patterns. So this is another video that I want to do. I touched on it before in regards to sacred geometry and the concept of logos, but I wanted to get a little bit deeper into that in another stream sometime, obviously after Halloween, and look at cymatics, look at fractal mathematics, look at the sacred geometric structures that are present within vibratory sound waves. That's what the whole science of cymatics is about. So if that is the case, then maybe, just maybe, words actually do carry a level of vibration, a level of importance that the written word does not, even though the written word still contains meaning, right? And this is what we were talking about with sigil magic. To begin this conversation, when we began this stream, we talked about sigil magic and how you can take something non-physical and manifest it physically through the manipulation of the symbols. But there is something very interesting about the spoken word, even within our Christian theology, even within magical theory. Something very, very special about the spoken word. I mean, look at our liturgy as Orthodox. We sing and chant and speak the entire liturgy. So that's how we worship God is again through singing and chanting. Very interesting stuff. Okay, so looks like we can move on here. You know what? I totally forgot that I had an image of Merlin. So this is an image that I forgot to grab when I was talking about Merlin and him being the sort of source of many of our archetypes regarding the wizard, and his hat, his long hair, his long beard. This is a early 20th century depiction, trying to be consistent with the history of his expression, his artistic, depiction. And so I just want to throw that out there because I've already skipped it and I totally forgot because I get wrapped up in my own head as usual. So the next one that I want to do is actually go over this image right here. This is the magician within the tarot. And I wanted to just move methodically through the symbolism and how, again, we're going to see things that resemble relationships that I guess maybe we could talk about being Christ-like, but also it comes back to the magician end up worshiping himself, right? Worshiping creation, worshiping oneself. So let me just move that back. Okay, so the first thing that we need to look at, and I think is important, is that the magician is the number one card in the tarot deck. The number one. Sir Dabsalot says, isn't Merlin just an anglicized Hermes Thoth? I wouldn't reduce it to that simplistically, but I don't think it's incorrect. Merlin was actually an amalgamation, and I mentioned this earlier, of many what was believed to be historical and non-historical figures. And so, but Merlin does have, again, I think that's why I think there's this archetype here. He does embody many of the same archetypal characteristics of Hermes, the Greek Egyptian god, and then Thoth, the purely Egyptian god, related to gods of magic, gods of language. But Merlin doesn't take, even though he's made in their image, he doesn't take the mythological importance that Hermes does. Like nobody worships Merlin. Merlin was a mythological figure depicted in the Middle Ages related to the King Arthur myths. So that's why I want to say yes and no, and just be a little bit more nuanced, because yes, obviously he is embodying many of the same archetypes as Hermes and Thoth, but no, he's not being worshipped. People worshipped Hermes. People worshipped Thoth. People prayed to these entities. I don't know of anybody. I'm sure there's somebody did, but Merlin wasn't typically a reverential figure. People didn't reverence and worship Merlin. It was known that he was part of the King Arthur myths. But point. I mean, it's a worthy point to make. So, Anyways, first thing about the tarot deck in regards to the Magician that I think is worth highlighting is that it's the number one card. And when we think of numero uno, obviously, I think we would think of the incarnation of the Logos as being the one, right? God the Father is transcendent. And so even within in our theology, we only know the Father through the Son. And this gets more sophisticated in regards to our uncreated energies and how, the uncreated energies of the Logos, we're talking about logic, reason, truth, honor, love, language, all these different things that we interact with those. And when we interact with those, we are interacting with the energies of God. So the Logos is the one that is tied to creation, tied to the manifestation of reality, right? He is God's will created the world through the Logos. And so when we look at the sort of number one, I think we could certainly get a sort of orthodox theological understanding of how that could be related to the Logos. But anyways, the first thing is look at his right hand. What is this magician doing with his right hand? He is raising the scroll towards the sky, towards the heaven, right? And so the scroll, what is a scroll? Something that you write things down on. So we see the repetition of this language archetype, of this writing archetype. Again, we talked about Hermes, Thoth, Mercury, all deities related to magic, all deities related to writing and language. And we see the magician in his right hand holding up a scroll pointing up to the sky, if you will. You could say heaven. And then what's he doing in his left hand? He's pointing down to the ground, So this obviously is already highlighting the as above, so below. Exactly. Patrick Griglio says as above, so below. Exactly. It's the Hermetic adage, as above, so below, as within, so without. And that itself is a sort of circularity, right? If you think about it, as above, so below. Not that there, when in our Lord's Prayer, we talk about as on heavens, or, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So there is this mirroring of earth and heaven even within our Christian paradigm. But I would say deeper within the Hermetic or the magical paradigm, as above, so below, as within, so without, reflects a sort of circularity. And I think this is going to come into the circularity of the infinity sign above his head, the circularity with the Ouroboros around his waist. We'll see that here in a second. So we see the magician holding the scroll, pointing towards the sky, and then we see his left hand pointing down towards the ground. Even at another way, we see the right hand pointing towards transcendence, the right hand path. We see the left hand pointing down towards the terrestrial realm, earth, the left-handed path, right? A more worldly path. And that's true with really any tantric tradition to a degree. So I think there's another element there. Also, this pointing as above, so below is highlighting, as we've already indicated, the magician standing as the mediator between the above and the below, as a mediator between the non-physical, the transcendent, and the physical, the terrestrial, or between heaven and earth again. So we see this magician, this figure, this archetype standing there as the in-between, as the go-between. And even that psychopomp, right? We talked about this in Hermeticism. The psychopomp is somebody who can go in and out of the world of the dead and the living. We see this in Hermes and Thoth and Mercury. All these deities were also psychopomps. Narrow Path says Ouroboros belt. Yeah, I'll be getting at that in a second. So we see him as the bridge, as the go-between, as the mediator. Again, so the next thing is his white robe, right? The magician in this tarot card is wearing a white robe. Why? Because white represents purity. And so he's symbolizing purity. Now, who as Christians would we deem as the pure one? Again, we see, I think, a sort of slight manipulation, a subtle diversion into a worship of man, but using things that I think we would agree with. And so then the red cloak represents worldly experience and knowledge, because the magician is this one who has immense experience, who has immense knowledge, right? We've talked about his sophistication of language, being surrounded by books, having a philosophical disposition and all this stuff. So the red robe represents worldly experience and knowledge, which is draped over his purity, right? His human experience, his worldly experience, and his wisdom, his knowledge is draped over his purity. Again, I think very interesting there. What's going on? Is it a manipulation of the logos? Maybe. Then we can look at the table. Look what's going on the table. What do we see there? For those of you, some of you may already be aware, some of you may not, but what we're seeing there are the four symbols of the tarot suits themselves. The cup, the pentacle, the sword, and the wand. These, if you get into tarot, is the four suits of the cards, right? And he has those laying on the table, each of which are symbolizing one of the four elements. And what they're also doing is highlighting that these are the tools in which he is able to manipulate the world, manipulate the natural world, right? It is through the four elements that signify his dominion over and the tools used to achieve his desires. It's the four elements. And that's what allows him to bring things into being, right? Bring things into being. Who do we believe in our theology brings things into being? Again, I think something that's very interesting there. So again, the table, we see the four suits of the tarot cards: the pentacle, the cup, the sword, the wand, and then each of which is representing one of the four elements, and all of which are representing the tools, the methods, the elements that this magician has dominion over and is able to use to manifest his desires, to bring things into being. And then he has the infinity sign over his head, of course, and that is to symbolize the infinite nature of, obviously he's limited based on being human in regards to his power, but the Ouroboros around his waist, and the infinity sign above his head symbolizes this sort of cyclical, ever-returning nature of the energy that he uses, right? That the processes of creation, the processes of being that he's using to manifest, they are ever regenerative. They are never ceasing. That is what's being symbolized here. Clearly, he's going to die, so it's not like he's infinite. It's not like he's eternal. It's symbolizing what the magician does, right? We're looking at the magician tarot card. And so the infinite symbol is saying that this process is infinite, which again, we would reject as Christians, because Christianity believes that creation itself has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so we see this eternal understanding of creation present in most pagan ideologies, most pagan worldviews, especially with notable figures like Plato and Aristotle within the Greek philosophical tradition, believing that creation was eternal itself. Therefore, their conception of God never had to be cleaved from creation, that there has to be a creator that's cleaved off of creation itself to account for the causality. Aristotle gets close with his unmoved mover, but they don't get what we would consider a sort of theistic model. They would never get to that far. But so we see the infinity sign, and then around his belt, like I said, we see the snake, the Ouroboros, biting his own tail, symbolizing eternal circularity, or what what a lot of magicians or magically minded individuals like to say, oh, well, this is symbolic of life, death, and renewal, right? This continued process, the ever-changing distribution of energy and its cyclical form. This whole concept comes from ancient Egypt. The Ouroboros as a symbol comes from ancient Egypt. And I don't think we can help but notice the use of the serpentine symbolism, the use of the serpentine energy. I mean, look at what was one of the Horcrux of Lord Voldemort in Harry Potter, other than like a huge anaconda. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. Not that we can't ever use serpents. I mean, look at Moses and the serpent and the staff. So it's not like every time we see a serpent, we need to think of the evil one or something like that. But certainly there is a different set of symbolic interpretations, a different hermeneutics, if you will, from a Christian paradigm than most magical paradigms. And so the last thing that I wanted to highlight with this magician tarot card is the flowers symbolize the blossoming and fruition of his aspirations. And so above him and below him, his aspirations are manifested. They blossom. They come to fruition. And this is the whole point of the magician. The whole point of the wizard is to manifest one's will. And that's, again, being symbolized in this tarot card. So that really sums up my entire video here. Again, we've gone through what is magic. We talked about the sort of academic understanding of magic. Then we got into what the etymological roots, what magic is, how magic can be used, the false form of white, gray, black magic. And then we got into the wizard archetype. We tied that back into Merlin, how that relates to John Dee, and then very interesting aspects of wizards that we see over and over again. And then we looked into the symbolism of the magician tarot card. And so one of the things that I want to say moving forward, guys, is whenever you watch one of my streams, feel free to timestamp things you think are interesting so I can start cutting more clips. I want to cut more clips. People have been asking me this for a while now. Cut clips, cut clips. It is a little time consuming, and I hate going back and rewatching my videos. So if you have something you're like, oh, I really like this, go ahead and like leave comments and timestamp them. That way I can go back and look at the comments and say, okay, grab this, and then it just makes it a lot easier for me. So anyways, that sums up today's video. Let me see if we have any more super chats. Oh, looks like we had a couple. Doorman 360 threw in $5 more and said, it's interesting how the Merlin seeks knowledge and power, but struggles against the feminine charms. He seeks to master the world, but not his passions. That's a really great point, Doorman 360. Very, very good point about the Merlin archetype. And so we don't see that same, like within a Gandalf, which interestingly enough, was played by a homosexual man, and then the author of Harry Potter claiming that Albus Dumbledore was also homosexual. I don't know if those are connected or not, but I thought it was interesting. But we don't see those two archetypes struggling with young women, struggling with the sort of sexual passions, like you would see with a Merlin in the Legends of King Arthur, where that is obviously his weak point, is young women. So great point there, Doorman 360, very good point. And want to learn truth through in another $10. Thank you very much, brother. And he said, I read an article a while back arguing the difference between miracles versus magic. Miracles are intended to demonstrate legitimate pro-social authority, whereas magic is used for anti-social control. I guess maybe that's one way to look at it. I would say a much easier way to look at the difference between miracles and magic is that miracles are God's will and magic is man's will. with the aid of supernatural forces. So within the Christian paradigm, we would say magic does exist, but it's the implementation of whose will ultimately comes dominant. And within the Christian worldview, it's all about God's will and submitting ourselves to God's will as opposed to our own humanly depraved and fallen will. So I think that's one of the easier ones. Does the following of man's will lead to anti-social control? Could be, but also when we look at the magic that's replete within the social media companies, I mean, these people absolutely are obsessed with magic. When I lived in Berkeley, Thelema and sort of magical spirituality is sort of the go-to. That is the dominant form of spirituality in the Bay Area. So not that there aren't plenty of people who are Christians or Muslims or Buddhists or all this stuff, get into the transcendental consciousness stuff, transcendental meditation, the very westernized understandings of Buddhism as like just meditating and having like a pure mind or something. I mean, these are very gross reductions of what these traditions really represent in the geographies in which they exist in, back in East Asia, back in India, even Southeast Asia, where Theravada Buddhism takes root. So, good point, interesting point. I think that there's different ways you can demarcate the two, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Let me see here. Oh, we got another one. Gabriel R. threw in $4.99. Thank you very much, brother. I really appreciate that. And Gabriel says, could modern songwriting be tied to a sort of magic, playing with words, rhythms, sounds, which at times entrance the listener? I would say absolutely, but it's not just modern. That is the historical process of these things. And that is why us not being in being basically in a very degenerate, arguably fallen, satanic, degenerate culture that promotes a lot of stuff that you and I don't believe in, that, yeah, the music industry then uses the art, the way in which you influence people's minds through rhythms, through words, through, again, incantations, to do different things. So look at then the music that's promoted right now in our society. Look at WAP. Look at Cardi B. Look at how she, her talking about the manipulation of men and drugging them, taking their money and stuff like that. She's a stripper. Like look at all the values she embodies. And then look at the promotion of that type of music. Look at those lyrics. Look at those words. And it's not just rap music. Rap music is just a very gross, demonstrable form of these things. But it's really all of our music industry. And that's why, I'm very much interested in lyrics of songs. So I don't listen to a lot of songs that I don't like the lyrics to, even though maybe there's a few things I disagree with, or as long as it's not like absolute degenerate, I might be behind it. But the music industry very much is a sort of magical process. That's why then look at the music videos. Look at the occult, the satanic, the hermetic, the Wiccan elements, and the pagan elements of most of their music videos. It's all a ritual. The music itself is a ritual tied to the music video, tied to the performances. It's all a ritual. And so when you say, could they be a sort of magic? I say emphatically, yes, they absolutely are a form of magic. And we can combat that stuff by just doing stuff that praises God, right? Create your own stuff. If you're musical, if you have a talent, if you're poetic, write poems. Just have it have logos, right? Have it have some divine order to it, and see where it goes. I guarantee you, it's going to affect people in the positive manner. It's going to help them reorient, help them piece themselves back together. We live in such a broken society. If you guys can, please smash that like button. If you are a newcomer and you just came to the stream, please smash the like button. Would greatly appreciate that. I'm not seeing any more questions. SS says this stuff is fascinating. Thank you very much. Base Philosophy Mom says, I used to be super into tarot. Well, I myself, I have a tarot deck somewhere. I obviously don't use it or get into it anymore, but I used to be obsessed with this stuff as well. The bishop's staff has a pair of snakes on them. Doorman 360. I don't know what you're referring to specifically. Maybe I'm in the dark right now. When you say the bishop's staff, are you talking about a particular bishop or a Christian bishop? You know, again, when you look at serpents wrapped around a staff, you have to look at the caduceus. You have to look at the staff of Asclepius. Man, words have been escaping me today. The Asclepius is a single staff with a single snake, which was representative of medicine and healing. And then we have the caduceus, which is a winged staff with two serpents, and that's representative of Hermes. So, interesting stuff. Base Philosophy said maybe you can get a minion to cut the clips for you. Maybe. Okay. Like King David wrote music to God on his harp, Psalms. Yeah, I think we just have to engage with culture, but again, as Orthodox, we just have to sanctify it. We just have to do things that promote our worldview, promote our values, and I think that will go a long ways. So, Thomas Hinder said back in the 80s, Mr. has a song, Kyrie. Oh, Kyrie eleison. I was not aware. I may have to listen to that. Thank you, Thomas Henderson. Sir Dabs a lot says Orthodox Patriarch staff. Are you talking about what Doorman 360 was talking about this? Oh, the Orthodox Patriarch staff has snakes. Maybe it's him treading over snakes. I don't know. I'd have to see the symbol and to see how much it resembles like the caduceus or something like that. If you guys, Sir Dabs a lot or Doorman 360, if you guys are on Instagram, follow me. You know, like, hey, everybody watching right now, if you're interested, like, I post a lot about like my regular life on my Instagram. It's at DPHARRY, and I'll send you guys a link right here, a direct link. If you guys are on Instagram, feel free to hit me up over there. I do a lot more stuff about my life. You know, obviously this YouTube's very intellectual and academic, and I hope to incorporate more personal stuff on my website. So like a members only video, I'm going to do one talking about my experience at a Thelemic Gnostic Mass when I moved to Berkeley, California. This was in Oakland, California. I went to one. I'm going to talk about that whole experience on my members only video library over at the website. Like I said, tonight I have to edit and then get up my video that I filmed today on St. Basil the Great and 3 poems that he wrote that are present within the Orthodox prayer book. Very, very beautiful prayers. So that will be up there. And so just some different content that maybe I don't want to necessarily post for everybody here on the YouTube channel, you can get a hold of over at the website. Okay, you can just search up the Serpents of Orthodoxy. Okay, let me pull this up real quick. Serpents of Orthodoxy images. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'd have to get deeper into this symbol, but that is quite interesting. It doesn't look like it resembles the caduceus where they're wrapped around the staff, but I'm sure Orthodoxy has a very interesting description of why they chose that to be their symbol. I need to look more into that myself. I'm not aware. But that is actually pretty cool. So anyways, guys, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions. I don't see anybody asking any more questions. Again, If you'd like to support what I'm doing, you can always donate through the website, davidpatrickharry.com. But if you want some exclusive content, I'm telling you, I'm posting. It's not any, I don't, even though a lot fewer people watch, it is just as good as anything that I put on YouTube. I put just as much effort into my videos for my members only because I want to make sure that the money they pay per month is worth it. So if you guys are interested and you like what is going on the YouTube channel, make sure to check out what's going on over at the members only stuff on the website. I'm telling you, you'll enjoy it. So with that being said, I will get out of here. I'll maybe just leave a few more seconds in case anybody has any more questions or comments that they would like to share. Feel free. And again, like for today's video, I am going to continue on with some of the topics that we talked about today. I'm going to add to today's discussion with a members only video. Oh, want to learn truth through another $10. Thank you so much, brother. My gosh, I really, really, really appreciate that. He said, I enjoy the orthodox discussions you lead about magic, its existence, its power, and theories on it, whether academic or esoteric. Keep it up. Thank you very much, brother. Oh, Sir Dabs. Oh, what was your question? How do you argue with Golden Dawn types who say the four suits are the... Okay. Yeah. And they say that they get their magic from God. I'm not one of them, but they make that claim. Yeah. Well, all that stuff is rooted within a perennialism. So there's when you look at like the Hermetic order, the Golden Dawn and stuff like that, it's very interesting. You know, again, you're looking at people like your Aleister Crowleys of the world, Jack Parsons, that everything is trying to take religion and all these different world ideologies and sort of synthesize them into a perennialistic one, the great one. So how do you argue the Golden Dawn types that argue that the four suits? I mean, use scripture, use orthodox theology. They say it's Yahweh. The four suits stand for the four letters of Yahweh and all this stuff. Most of the time, I feel like it's just very reductionistic arguments, and so I would need to further see what the strongest version of their argument that there are four suits of the tarot and everything. That's what Arcandre said. What is their argument in the first place? I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I see Sir Dabs a lot, and I trust that he probably knows what he's talking about. But he says that they claim that the four suits, I guess the four suits of the tarot, are representative of Yahweh. And you have to be careful too, because a lot of this stuff is Jewish, right? Magic and Kabbalah is a consistent strain within Judaism. So when you're looking at like Jewish forms of magic, there's tons of it. I mean, there's even Christian forms of magic. I mean, that's what Pico della Mirandola was all about, was learning Jewish Kabbalah and then Christianizing it and calling it Christian Kabbalah. So we just have to be more careful. We just have to be more sophisticated in the way we look at this. I'm not positive what their argument is. I would need to look into that to really give your question, a credible response. I don't know. I mean, most of the stuff, that's why I like the transcendental argument for God. I like what Dyer does. But if you approach it from a paradigm, if their paradigm doesn't make sense from the first place, like perennialism, they're just appropriating things that can haphazardly like fit patterns and they can provide definitions and oh, you're talking about, okay, it all comes from, Cornelius Henry Agrippa is who he's referring to when he says it's all from Agrippa. Again, all that stuff that's all Northern Protestant alchemy and Hermeticism and all that stuff. They remove Jesus from the equation. Early Paleo Hebrew translate to hand behold, nail behold, yet you'll never find Golden Dawn say that because they remove Christ from the equation. Agreed. Yeah, I mean, Gnostic influence for sure. But even if it comes from Henry Cornelius Agrippa, but I think he was Northern Germany or Netherlands. I'd have to double check, but big influencer in regards to alchemy, in regards to Kabbalah, in regards to Christianizing Kabbalah. This is all 16th century stuff. But yeah, I'm not positive, so I don't want to sit here and pretend I know what the Golden Dawn's arguments for the four suits being the letters of Yahweh being. I'm not positive. I'd have to look into it. If you guys know, have like a specific thing I could look at, feel free to send it to me. You can email it to me at churchoftheeternallogos@gmail.com, or just DM me, whether at Twitter at eternal_logos, or on Instagram, where I spend most of my time, at DPHARRY. So that's all I have to say. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a better response there, Sir Dabs a lot. I just don't know what their argument is for that. I'd have to double check. But anyways, I think that is really going to wrap up today's stream. Thank you, everybody who has been here. Thank you, everybody who smashed that like button and showed some support. Thank you very much to everybody who threw in a super chat and appreciated what I'm trying to do. Thank you. And if you guys want, remember, I'm posting another exclusive video up tonight, and we'll be doing another one, continuation of this stream, tomorrow, and doing another one talking about my experience at a Gnostic mass in Oakland, California. Yeah, Renaissance German, but it was 16th century. Yeah, Henry Cornelius Agrippa was 16th century, Northern Germany, and was deeply embedded into Hebrew. He was very much interested in learning the Hebrew language, looking at Kabbalah, alchemy, Hermeticism, all that stuff. Oh, Frater Xavier is an occult YouTuber that argues. I know who that Frater Xavier guy is. Yeah. Yeah, back when I was into magic, yeah, send me a link, Sir Dabs a lot. I'd be interested. I got more woke, if you will, on that Frater Xavier dude. He has really suckered a lot of people into giving him like $20 for his books or membership. He's made a ton of money from his sort of magical talks and stuff. It's really crazy. But I'm glad you're out of that. I know I haven't watched one of his videos in probably 2 or 3 years. Yeah. But please, Sir Dabs a lot, send me a link. I'd be very much interested. But anyways, with that being said, guys, love you. Thank you for all the love and support. If you want some exclusive content, go to davidpatrickcarey.com and create a members account. And if not, that's cool too. Be always posting here on YouTube. And hopefully I will be back Wednesday or Thursday with another stream. And I will try to cut up maybe 1 or 2 clips from today and maybe 1 or 2 clips from a previous stream to share tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. But again, thank you guys for everything. Thank you for everybody who supported and who came